My fellow Americans, good afternoon. What's new? I'm not here to talk to you about what's new. Thank goodness. I'm here to talk to you about something that has been troubling me for decades. And 4 years ago, I finally decided to do something about it. And I'm here to invite all of you to join me in whatever way would be appropriate. I'm trying to answer a question that I have in common with most of your students, and that question is about purpose. Why am I here? What am I trying to do? What do I need to do? Literally, I'm here because the founding vision for this organization that came from Stan Jones led him in a conversation about 2 months ago with me to kind of draw out from me my thoughts about how, in the words of one recent candidate, the system is rigged. And as he heard me talk about this, he asked me if I would come and deliver a similar message to this meeting, and that's why I'm here. And I want to commend publicly Stan Jones for his vision, his energy, his staying focused to orchestrate this extraordinary organization. This organization is, yes, please, for Stan. I also want to thank Tom Sugar, who's managed me very ably to get me here, and especially my longtime friend and fellow laborer in the vineyards of student success, the gentleman who so kindly introduced me, Henry Fernandez. Complete College America, I think, symbolizes the best of what nonprofit organizations are all about. Public charities who are in pursuit, like all of us, for the common good. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very aware that I'm the last person literally standing in the way of you of a stretch. And so I'll do my best to get this message out as efficiently as I can. And as I do so, I'm reflecting on the accent of the gentleman on the video who preceded me. And you know, we used to think that that country, which obviously is his native country, had much less mobility as a class-dominated system than our country. The evidence at present is the United States is significantly more class-driven with less mobility than the United Kingdom. Who would have thought it would have come to this? Well, what I want to show you is a slide that graphically depicts my source of expertise on Gateway courses. And what this slide shows you is my first semester grades that were sent home to my parents 13 years before the Buckley Amendment to the Privacy Act. And those grades, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to see them to believe them. I'm just going to report them. Those grades were 3 Fs and 2 Ds and 1 A. What do you think the A was in? I had a slide on that for you too. The A was in physical education. I was a varsity athlete, and I was going to show you a picture of my team. Maybe I can still do that. And one of my best grades that fall was a D, what my South Carolina students call a dog. And that D was in public speaking. Who would think? And I really should have gotten an F in that course because I had overcut it. I had driven 6 times, 6 times in the fall term from Southern Ohio to New England to see a special young woman in my life. And I don't want you to think that she made me do that. She didn't make me do anything. I made that choice. And like many first-year students, it was not a wise choice. Anyway, so you don't get to see a picture of my team. You wouldn't be able to pick me out in it anyway. But anybody want to guess my sport? It was a non-contact body sport, huh? Imagine that, an adolescent male not wanting any body contact. It's something you do on the water, okay? Rowing, okay? It's a sport called crew. At the racing stroke, you press over, you pull an oar through the water. It's the equivalent of pressing 70 pounds over your head a minute, which means I'm a masochist. Anyway, what I'm here to do, ladies and gentlemen, is to talk about what I call America's best kept dirty little secret. All right? And that dirty little secret, thank goodness, is something that we are not required to report to iPads, which means that your prospective students cannot determine in advance what the D, W, F, I grade rates are for the courses that they are contemplating enrolling in, okay? Now just imagine if you were to go to a hospital or contemplate going to a hospital to get an operation, You can get all kinds of data today on the outcomes of similar surgical procedures to the ones you're considering, but we do not publish mortality rates of that kind for our incoming students. Maybe we will someday. All right, so eventually, when my slides are loaded, I'm going to show you some of that. Okay, there's the picture. I'm in the last row at the top, the last guy on the right. I'm the one that used to be the most handsome. Okay, next slide. I promised you I was going to tell you dirty little secrets, which I am going to do now. And next slide, please. I'm here to publicly implore you to do something about this. In true Complete College America fashion, you are definitely an action organization. So I'm here to talk about, next slide, gateway courses. And what in the world are gateway courses? Well, they're foundation level, they're high risk, they're high enrollment, not necessarily per section, but in the aggregate. They're what our students sometimes correctly refer to as killer courses. They include developmental courses. They are the gateways to both general education and the majors, so we hit them twice. Next slide. Largely, disproportionately, they represent something that is unique to American higher education. And that's what we call the survey course, which is an introduction to all the knowledge in the particular discipline in one amazing semester. And this type of course has a number of characteristics that pose some challenges for students. For one thing, these courses are extraordinarily superficial. They are boring to the students and most of us faculty who teach them. They are manifested by high degrees of absenteeism. They're usually not connected to any form of outside of class learning, which students enjoy more than in-class learning. They result in the fact that most students take no courses in the first year of college in their intended major. Think of the consequences of that for motivation. There are courses in which students don't do any research at all. My second son told his major professor at commencement, I never thought he'd make it, but he said to his professor, you know, if you had given me a first year like you'd given me a senior year, my whole college experience would have been different. And what he was saying was in his senior year, he actually had to do some research, but none in the first year. In these survey courses, there's very little, if any, academic work done in teams, even though employers want to know that our graduates have had experience working in teams. The gateway course, the survey course, is largely instruction that has been increasingly outsourced to adjuncts, and it is disproportionately lecture-based, the least preferred learning modality of the students that we enroll in our colleges and universities. Next slide, please. All right, so these courses make up my answer to a fundamental question that I think you all need to think about in your own campuses, and that is, what are the most common experiences that your beginning students experience? And are they the experiences you ideally would like to have them encounter? So in addition to parking, the food service, your registration system, and the fee payment process, these gateway courses, I am now arguing, are the real first-year experience. I want to repeat that because that's a very significant statement for me. I am the coiner of the so-called FYE, first-year experience concept. This was registered as a trademark by me in 1982. It has been ubiquitously used to describe a variety of interventions to improve the success of first-year students, and most commonly, the so-called first-year seminar, the College Success Course. I'm here to argue that the FYE I've been talking about for 40 years is not the real FYE. The real FYE are the gateway courses that your students and mine are taking. Next slide, please. At the risk of doing exactly what Yuri Treisman urged us not to do, I don't want you to look at the following data and, as to quote Yuri, to sit back and admire the problem, unquote. But I have found in the past 4 years that the key to moving campuses to take more action is to reflect on the data of what's actually happening. Next slide, please. All right, I want to share with you some data that my colleagues and I have been collecting since 2003, 2004. In what context have we been doing this? The context is a relatively small nonprofit organization that's based outside Asheville, North Carolina, the Institute for Excellence in Undergraduate Education, that is immodestly named for me. And thanks to the Lumina Foundation for Education, we've been offering an initiative since 2003 called Foundations of Excellence in the First College Year. It's a strategic planning assessment process where we ask institutions to work with us to develop an action plan to look at everything they do with new students and to then execute this plan to improve student performance. And we have found that institutions who do two things get big gains in student retention. The first is they have to have a plan, and most of them don't have a plan. And then secondly, they have to execute that plan to a high degree. Okay, one of the things we've been asking our participating institutions, 280 institutions to be precise, since 2003, is to provide to us their data on what we're calling DWFI, high enrollment, high failure rate courses. And so now the next slide, I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see this. Yeah, it looks okay. All right, so there, if you look in the first line, what we found in the first year we had data on this project is in the this is at four-year institutions, the 24-year institutions that reported this data, over 100 courses, yielded an average DWFI rate of 25%. That means that of the students taking those 100 courses, 25% of them got a DWFI. You fast forward 9 years, and we looked at a total of 109 institutions and 545 courses. That again is in the baccalaureate sector, and with yielding a 25% DWFI rate. Okay, the institutions we looked at were overwhelmingly regional comprehensive public universities, as represented by the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. As a matter of fact, the big thinker, the key innovator of that organization, George Mahaffey, who's one of my bosses, one of my directors, is here today. When I see him present, I know good things are going to happen. So we've had a lot of the ASCU institutions in this data set, as well as a number of privates and some research extensives, including 2 members of the prestigious Association of American Universities. So this data cuts across most all baccalaureate sector institutions. Next slide, please. Here we have on the next slide, which you will see eventually, I hope. Well, maybe you won't. Let's see. Not yet. Well, what I was going to show you was a list of courses by discipline. That in this same sample we found, there we are, yeah, you can still see some of that. All right, we found that economics gets the prize for being not only the dismal science, but that scored the highest on our DWFI reporting here. Looking at 6 different institutions, we found that the DWFI rate for principles of economics was right at 40%. You can look at the other disciplines there, and one I want to call out to you particularly because it's my life's work and it suggests I still have some work to do in this area. Thank goodness I've got the time, which suggests that 16% of the students who were enrolled in so-called college success, FYE success, first-year seminars, 16% received a DWFI. Now that, of course, is the course to teach college students how to do college. And we know from very good research that one of the best predictors of who is not going to return to college next year is a student who gets a DWFI in the college success course. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. Let's go to the next slide, please. The next slide looks at our colleagues in 2-year colleges, and by the way, my first teaching in American higher education was done in a small South Carolina textile mill town where all the students were either mill workers or children of mill workers, and I'd come in from another planet. I was on active duty in the military, and my squadron commander had ordered me to perform community service. I was 23 years old. I said, "Sir, what is community service?" Nobody had ever said to me, "You ought to do community service." He said, "Community service is doing adjunct teaching for the University of South Carolina." This is, Gardner, this is 2 years after the Civil Rights Act, and you have more education than most of the troops in this squadron. I was a psychiatric social worker, and he said, "Only the doctors have more education." I was in a hospital squadron. Anyway, so that's how I became a college educator, and some years later I became the vice chancellor for the university's 2-year college system. So much for upward social mobility. Anyway, look at the data here. We started the first year there collecting the DWFI rates in 2-year colleges, and again, 50 courses. The average DWFI rate in those 50 courses was 36%. Let's fast forward another 9 years, and we see that we looked at 92 institutions, 454 courses, with an average 35% DWFI rate across those courses. Now, what strikes me here, and this didn't occur to me until yesterday, and I was, for about the 10th time, looking at this PowerPoint, and I had an epiphany. When I was teaching regularly, I used to tell my students that one of my goals for any college course is that at least one of my students will have an epiphany in some educational activity that I'm facilitating. And that is an insight that leads to decision-making and transformative action. So my epiphany here is that the consistency across nearly a decade in both 2-year and 4-year institutions getting very, very similar outcomes. And what this suggests to me is that these organizations have been organized to get those outcomes. And they're very good at getting those outcomes. They get them consistently, which must mean that we're doing this deliberately. You know, a basic point about organizational change, ladies and gentlemen, is the outcomes you're getting right now are as a result of the way you're organized right now. And if you want to get different outcomes, you have to be organized differently. Anyway, let's look at the next slide, please. And there you'll see the courses that we looked at in those 92 institutions. And you'll see that developmental math, not surprisingly, took the prize for the highest DWFI rate. Let's look again at my favorite course, the first-year success course. Here the story is really grim. In these 92 institutions, we found that 28% of the students enrolled in a college success course got a D, W, F, or I. What does that say? It says that that course is in need of radical surgery if it can't produce better outcomes than that. Now let's go to the next slide, because this illustrates something even more important. What we asked these institutions to do, which was we asked them to look at their 5 highest enrollment courses. Our argument was you got to have a focus, you got to pick somewhere and to focus for your student success activity. So pick your 5 highest enrollment courses and tell us what percent of those 5 courses received a DWFI rate higher than 30%. We use 30% because that's the rate that's suggested by the University of Missouri, Kansas City, in the center there that has been responsible for the wonderful innovation supplemental instruction. So what we saw here is in the 2-year institutions, of their 5 highest enrollment courses, 67% of them had DWFI rates in excess of 30%. Correspondingly, 4-year institutions, different admission standards, somewhat different demographics, 21% of their 5 highest enrollment courses had DWFI rates in excess of 30%. All right, the picture, though, continues to deteriorate, ladies and gentlemen, and you will have a drink later. I'm sure you'll recover from this. But let's get to another slide, please. And I want to show you my most recent lessons on this depressing topic from an initiative that our nonprofit organization started 4 years ago. After accumulating this data on these deplorable DWFI rates, we decided that we just had to do something to focus specifically on high failure rate courses. So we launched in 2013 a pilot for an initiative called Gateways to Completion. We now have over 40 institutions in this project, but when we started, we had 13. And of the 13, 3 were research-extensive universities. 5 were George Mahaffey's regional comprehensive universities, 3 were community colleges, and 2 were for-profit, that's for-profit, online publicly traded institutions. All right, so next slide. Let me show you what we found. We asked the participants at these institutions each institution to select 5 courses for assessment and redesign and hoped for improvement that we measured by a reduction of DWFI grades. And as you'll see, these 13 institutions, 2 of them picked principles of accounting, where the average DWFI rate was 43.4%. But of course, they were bested by developmental math at a DWFI rate of 49.4%. That was in 3 institutions. You can read the rest of the data here and get the picture. Now, what Stan most wanted me to share with you is what happens when you look at this picture in terms of the characteristics of the students. Next slide, please. Okay, here we find, next slide. I want to look at accounting. You know, I've been in the academy for a long time, but it wasn't until I did this project that I got a whole new appreciation for why this course matters. Ladies and gentlemen, what's the most popular major with our college students today? Business, right? Business. And what course must you get through in order to earn a business degree in America? Principles of accounting. So this course is not just about principles of accounting. It is the gateway to access and ultimately success in the field of business in American higher education. So in the accounting courses we looked at, we found that the course average for DWFI rates was 43.4%. And only 2 types of students did better than that average. People like me, white students, at 40.6, and females at 41.7. But let's drop down and let's look at the Pell eligible students. 47.4, first generations 48.2, and most stunningly, African Americans at 62%. Of the students in Principles of Accounting, African American students, received a DWFI of 62%, and 69.5% of the Hispanic Latino students in that course received a DWFI. And when I think about this, I think about my accountant. His name is Marty. He's a white guy. He's like a member of our family. My wife and I don't make any major decisions without talking to Marty. I've even got my kids and her kids, and ultimately our grandkids will all be getting advice from Marty. Marty even planned my most recent wedding date. But we're not going to have accountants that don't look like Marty if we don't do something about this. The future of America hinges on principles of accounting. I never thought I'd think such a heresy. Okay, now let's go to the next slide, please. Let's look at college mathematics. This is data. Have I got that? Yeah, I've got from 10 different institutions, and a course average again, 35.3 DWFI. Again, whites are doing better, and so are women, and there we go downhill. The Hispanic proportion here is 36.2. We had enough data in this set to report for Native American 48.3 and African American 49.1. All right, let's look now at chemistry. That's the next slide, please. Chemistry, here we looked at general chemistry for both majors and non-majors in 4 institutions. Again, whites did the best at 30.2%. The course average is 31.9, females at 31.5. But look at the Hispanic, 45%, African American, 45.9. Let's not feel too good about how well the women are doing, because we know that women, many of the most qualified women, leave the sciences in very good academic standing. They do not persist because of the culture. Check out the pathfinding work on that by my friend Elaine Seymour, Why Students Leave the Sciences. All right, now the slide that I think Stan would have wanted me most to share with you, I'm finally going to get to if somebody will help me advance this. Okay, one more. Okay, now we're all interested in retention. Here's the takeaway about retention. Let's look in one course at one institution, Principles of Accounting. The DWFI rate for that course was 54% in Principles of Accounting. Of the students who took that course and who got a DWFI, and in spite of getting a DWFI, were still in good academic standing. They still had a C average. What happened to them after taking Principles of Accounting? This data tells you 81.6% of the students who still had a C, but who got a DWFI in Principles of Accounting, they left. They did not return. Let's go down the list. Foundations for physiology, biology, what I've learned at some places is called A&P. At first I thought they referred to the defunct grocery chain. But there we did much better. We had an 18.9% average DWFI rate, but of the students who got DWFIs and who still had eligibility to remain, 55% of them dropped out of college. I visited a public regional university in Texas that will remain nameless a couple of years ago, and I asked them, why are so many students failing A&P? And the answer I got was no prerequisites. And so I asked the one faculty member who taught all the sections of this course, why don't you have prerequisites? And he told me because we haven't had any in 40 years. Okay, let's go down the list to summarize this. The mean average then for these courses was 32.4, and of the students that got a DWFI and still had a C average who were eligible to continue, 61% of them voluntarily left the institution. And so, next slide, I conclude, I am not committing plagiarism here. I am going to cite my source. I got this from Complete College America. This concept of the bridge to nowhere. The bridge to nowhere, ladies and gentlemen, is the gateway course phenomena in American higher education. It's not just developmental students. Again, using your language, next slide, please. Gateway courses are American higher education's Bermuda Triangle, from which thousands of students enter, never to be seen again. All right. So next slide. What might explain these outcomes? Well, the general argument is to categorically blame the victim. Let's look at underpreparedness, poor high schools, poverty, first-generation status, students working too much, their immaturity. I know at age 17 when I started college, I was definitely immature. Lacking study habits, learning disabilities, you see the list. By the way, when I was on active duty in the military, I saw many troops with similar characteristics as these, but they perform much better in the military than they did in higher education. But we don't have the draft any longer, so we can't count on the military to rescue our citizens. Now, next slide, please. Some of us might want to ask, what roles do we, all of us in this room, play in this appalling student underperformance? I would argue that we have a large responsibility because of the historic low status of gateway courses. We have perpetuated their low status. We have marginalized and outsourced many of the faculty who teach these courses. In many departments, I'd say even most departments, we don't talk about these courses. They're not on the agendas of department meetings. They're not a priority for deans and department chairs. Many of us have an academic, social, Darwinian view of this, where we believe that such failure is inevitable. We've always had this failure. And some of us even believe that it's appropriate and it's a manifestation of standards. So, ladies and gentlemen, next slide, what could you do? Well, you and each of your own spheres of influence, your own area of responsibility and ability to control something that happens on a campus, you could take steps to make the addressing of failure rates in gateway courses a higher priority in an individual course that you might teach, in your academic department, your school, college, university, your system, your district, your state. So if you were to declare war, move 2 slides ahead, please, on gateway courses, next slide, what would you do? No, move ahead. Next slide, and one more, please. Thank you. What would you do? Well, very simply, you'd have to start talking about this. In the work that I've been doing now with about 40 institutions that are trying to move this needle and actually are succeeding in moving the needle, the most important thing they're doing is they're coming together and they're talking about what they didn't used to talk about. They are reducing their tolerance for failure. That's hugely important. They are collecting data. They're analyzing that data. They're sharing the data. They're discussing the implications of it. And they're focusing especially on the all-important role of the faculty. Why haven't we done this before now? I think because many of us are afraid of the faculty. Why would anybody be afraid of a warm, cozy, fuzzy guy like me? Okay, I don't understand that. We're approachable. We care deeply. We love our disciplines. We want to help our students be successful. What else would you do? Next slide, please. You have to conduct a rigorous self-study of high failure rate courses, each one. You have to deconstruct each course using various performance indicators, and you have to come up with a redesign. You have to offer a redesign. You have to assess the effectiveness of that and refine and offer again. Now quickly, one more slide, or another slide here, please. When you get into the weeds of all of this, next slide, the faculty are fundamental. But, in the words of the recently defeated candidate, it takes a whole village. Next slide, please. So I'm not here to blame my colleagues, to blame the faculty. I'm not here to apologize for them either. I'm here to accept responsibility along and on behalf of all of them. Now, what we don't want to do, next slide, is to simply offer fewer of these high failure rate courses. Next slide. We have to understand who is in this village And let me tell you who's in the village, in addition to people like me: our department chairs, our deans, our chief academic officers, those who provide academic support, those who do testing, those who prepare students for placement, those who do technology support, those who manage and design our facilities, those who do faculty development, and the all-important assistant and associate deans in colleges that really run the places because they develop the policies. So next slide. We have to focus on the things we control. And we control so many elements of the higher education environment that determine these DWFI rates. What do we control? We control our policies, we control who teaches, we control who assesses and evaluates these outcomes, we control faculty development, we control the rewards culture, we control how we inculcate new students and orient them, we control how we do or do not raise student expectations, we determine whether or not we actually place students in the courses for which they tested. We influence academic advising, the nature of the classroom facilities, to what extent we utilize technology, and the other things that I've listed on this slide. Next slide. There are many pieces of this conundrum. This is not a quick fix. You've got to look at general education, pedagogy, the faculty roles, of course, how you're delivering academic support, especially getting more student leaders to help students. You know, we know that the greatest influence on college students during the college years is the influence of other students. We're just beginning to discover how to effectively capitalize on this. We have to enhance the role of the first-year seminar. We have to figure out how to better integrate academic and student affairs. And growing right under our eyes with little control is this new profession of student success, which offers great potential for addressing these challenges. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, what's the take-home idea that I would like you to leave with, and I think is what Stan wanted me to have you leave with. Next slide, please. The idea, then, is that the underperformance of our students really comes all back to gateway courses. And if you're going to achieve social justice for more of your American college students and your international students as well, we must reduce these failure rates. And to do that, you have to make gateway courses a higher priority. So as I leave you finally, I invite you to consider any way that you could legitimately make gateway course outcomes more of a priority. And I don't have time to do this to demonstrate the kind of results you could get, but please, just trust me. Take it on faith. If you seriously approach this, you're going to do better. We must do better. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.